is confessional poetry and Sylvia Plath's poem Lady Lazarus. I repeat, Sylvia Plath's poem Lady Lazarus as a confessional poem. So as we have already discussed about the intricacies of the poem, I shall be today focusing mainly on the concept of confessional poetry. This confessional poetry came in common usage around September 1959 by critic Emin Rosenthal, who introduced the term confessional poetry in his review of Robert Lowell's Life Studies in the Nation. So this is the origin of the term confessional poetry. So it is a kind of revolution in poetic style, subject matter, and relationship between the poem speaker and the self. As poems are written by the poets, poems are assumed to be autobiographical, of the poet, by the poet, for the readers. But what differentiates this new form of poetry, confessional poetry, is a revolution in poetic style, innovations in the subject matter, and the newfound relationship between the poem's speaker and the self. The earlier modernist poetry of T.S. Eliot and his followers talked about objective correlative, a kind of unified sensibility that will allow the poet to work like a catalyst. Poetry is not an expression of emotion, according to T.S. Eliot, rather an escape from it. And in doing so, what the poet does is to create a set of situation, incident, action, character, and allow that dramatic persona to deliver a speech in a dramatic monologue format. And that becomes the content of the poem. This can be seen in Eliot's famous poem, A Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock. Much of the modernist poetry focused on this theory of impersonality of poetry. Impersonality in poetry is possible when the poet distances himself or herself from the subject matter. In case of confessional poetry, the subject matter becomes more personal, and it is the relationship between the poem's speaker and the self that becomes the central content of poetry. Therefore, in confessional poetry, there are actual events, real persona in the poem, and a development of personal symbology to a rejection of universal symbols. The symbols that are common publicly used in poetry, usually called universal symbols, these are replaced by personal symbols. In confessional poetry, we also find an intimate personal details of the poet gradually revealed. So it becomes more autobiographical in nature, that allows the poet to speak aloud his or her mind directly to the readers. This type of historical literary movement was supposed to have ended in 1970, but we find that confessional poetry, especially in the works of the female poets, continued even after 1970. Especially in case of Indian poetry in English, we have excellent examples of confessional poets like Kamala Das. In English poetry also we have confessional poets like Annie Sexton, Sylvia Plath, Robert Lovell, W.D. Snodgrass, etc. The poem for our study, Lady Lazarus, may be regarded as an example of confessional poetry, because here we find the subject matter is intimately personal, and the relationship between the poem speaker and Sylvia Plath, the poet, is very close, intricately interrelated. In this poem, we also find a revolution in poetic style. The conventional poetic form is abandoned, and through this persona of Lady Lazarus, the poet makes an intimate confessional statement directly addressed to the assumed listeners or audience. The reference to actual events drawn from life of a real person, in this case Sylvia Plath, can also be seen in this poem. While using public symbology, mainly drawn from the concentration camp of Germany of the 1930s, Sylvia Plath is turning those universal symbols into a more personal one. Such universal symbols are turned into personal ones, and this is how the poem develops its confessional technique. Intimate personal details are gradually revealed to the poem. Lady Lazarus can be regarded as a testimonial, as a statement of personal life spanning 30 years, divided into 3 decades, and such intimate personal details are gradually revealed to the readers. The literary movement that was there during that period was mainly focused on the representation of the crisis of the age. Most of the works were oriented towards society, and the speaker or the poet in those poems tried to convey the social being as a form of consciousness rather than the autonomous individual being of the first person poet narrator. Sylvia Plath therefore revolutionizes the poetic structure by changing the subject matter, revealing more about herself in the poem. Ted Hughes, who wrote the introduction to Sylvia Plath's collected poems that was published by Harper Colophon, stated that the last stage, the final phase of her work, he is talking from the editorial point of view, that dates from September 1960 onwards. Sylvia Plath was composing poems, almost one poem a day, and she was dating the poems. So the manuscript of the poems of the last phase contains real life events, real life dates. In some occasions, we have the modification of an earlier poem, and through that revision, real life experience and even contemporary historical events that are revised in the poem contain the new type of date, new date that is suffixed to them. From early 1962, according to Ted Hughes, Sylvia Plath began to save all her handwritten drafts and even kept the provisional final versions that are usually dated. So throughout this period, the calendar sequence is correct, And the only occasional doubt concerns the order of composition among the poems written on the same day. So these are the biographical markers that make these poems, especially the last poems of Sylvia Plath, almost autobiographical, resembling diary recording by a poet. So these last drafts of the poems were later on reproduced by the poet, husband Ted Hughes, and these works reveal more about the poet. So they may be considered as confessional poems. Confessional poetry is a form of intimate communication between the poet through the persona with the readers. This type of poetry can be regarded as autobiographical. Nevertheless, great poetry transcends the limits of autobiography and has a tendency to become universal. The personal is turned into public, the public into universal, and universal is then again turned into a focalized individual, the person, the first person. Therefore, through this focalization, the large world picture gets revealed. Sylvia Plath's poetry is of that quality where we have the development of the personal into public, public into universal, and the autobiography is therefore transformed into a sort of universal statement rather than just a mere autobiographical statement. Wordsworth, while defining poetry, said that poetry takes its origin from emotion recollected in tranquility, and there is a spontaneous overflow of powerful feeling. Fancy is a component of poetry, but in case of confessional poems, such fanciful flights are replaced by a more internal journey into the self, into the self-consciousness. So this conscious interpersonal or journey into the innermost recesses of the human mind transforms a public poetry into a personal one. Confessional poetry depends on the representation of the subject, I. In Sylvia Plath's poem, this subject I has been turned into a quasi-mythological figure based on imagination. This quasi-mythological figure of Lazarus, through this gender transformation, appears in this poem as Lady Lazarus, whose resurrection is possible in a hospital bed by the surgical procedures undertaken by the doctor. So this is a new type of revelation of the self that we find in this poem. Self-revelation is, of course, problematic because the subject reveals the self through a kind of self-dramatization. And in Lady Lazarus, this self-dramatization has been done in a theatrical manner. Plato, while defining the scope of poetry, stated that poetry is a falsification of the ideal, of the real, of the absolute. of the truth. And dramatic poetry is thrice removed from reality. Aristotle, on the other hand, stated that poetry is an imitation of an action. In case of tragedy, of serious action. So here we have a dramatic method that resembles Aristotle's theory of tragedy, where we have an imitation of an action that is serious, complete in itself, with a beginning, a middle, and an end, each incident or situation tied together in a logical manner, with cause and effect relationship, with necessity, probability, surfacing in the course of the action. This unity of action can be seen in Lady Lazarus. So this is a structured theatrical expression of the self through tragic dramatization. The speech rhythm is used that makes this poem resemble a dramatic monologue. A dramatic monologue is a between the speaker and the poet. This invented speaker, a character in the poem, addresses the speech to assumed audience. In some cases, the audience is anonymous, unnamed. In some cases, the audience presence as well as name are suggested by the speaker. Even the response of the audience can be seen in the poem Lady Lazarus. So, as a modernist poem, the poem explores the convention of dramatic monologue and uses T.S. Eliot's impersonal theory of poetry to perfection. Impersonal theory of poetry, however, differs from the theory of confessional poetry. T.S. Eliot himself said that poetry is not an expression of emotion, rather an escape from it. Confessional poetry requires a definition of poetry on a different line. So it is a revelation of the self or a direct communication between the poet and the reader through this confessional account. So this account is not possible in Lady Lazarus because the poet distances herself from Lady Lazarus and allows this Lady Lazarus to resemble her creator. So on this binary, on this contradiction, where we have excess of dramaticity, impersonality, distancing, and excess of personality expressed through the poem, confession, self-realization, and interiorization of the self. So we have a sort of subjective universality in the poem. According to Immanuel Kant, judgment, human judgment, should be based on this understanding of the self and the understanding of the universal together. He coins the phrase subjective universality, where the subject understands the self in relation to the understanding of the others, the universal understanding. Sylvia Plath also tries to bridge the gap between the self and the other, and thereby creates Lady Lazarus as a representative female as a symbol of the deprived, oppressed, suffering, infinitely suffering female in an otherwise male dominated society. So the structural coherence, the logical development, and the dramatic representation of the self through the creation of an imagined character, Lady Lazarus, makes Sylvia Plath's poetry different from what we understand by confessional poetry. We can say that Sylvia Plath's Lady Lazarus is a confessional poem with a difference. This difference lies in her use of Aristotle's definition of poetry and challenging the definition of poetry with Plato's suspicion regarding poetry, suspicion regarding the validity of poetry. As I said, that Plato suspected the use value of poetry and said that poetry is a copy of a copy. As it is a copy of a copy, it is twice removed from reality. In case of theatrical representation, as theatrical representation is an improvisation as well as dramatization of the story, we find that dramatic poetry is thrice removed from reality, according to Plato. Plato's suspicion was actually related to the interrelationship between fact and fiction. There is a narrow gap dividing fact and fiction, myth and history. In Sylvia Plath, this thin line dividing fact and fiction, myth and history, is strategically blurred. It has been blurred in order to make the confessions ambiguous. T.S. Eliot's concept of impersonality in poetry also requires the representation of the dramatic persona with reference to the others. In case of a dramatic monologue, there is only one single speaker. Therefore, there is little scope for the development of the personality of the others. Dramatic literature, on the other hand, has a scope of developing the other figures in relation to the central figure. In Lady Lazarus, the central figure speaks throughout. There is no reference to the presence of someone else speaking something, although there are, of course, the peanut munching crowd, the visitors, the doctor, persons in her life who are referred to in the poem. But their point of view is not included in the structure of the poem. Thus, we have a different type of representation that comes very close to confessional poem. Only when a single person speaks, the poetry becomes almost like a confessional diary account. Therefore, this poem balances the confessional with the universal by transporting the individual speaker to the level of a representative figure. If we read the lines of the poem, we will come to this realization that this speaker reveals a lot about the self. But these revelations are also related to the mythical and historical references or allusions. As the allusions are intermixed, the historical and the mythical, and there is no line dividing the gap between the historical and the mythical, the difference between fact and fiction is blurred. Several critics have accused Sylvia Plath of overdoing with the poetry of the self, of writing something more than she has experienced, of overstating her pain and agony. But it must be understood, or it must be kept in mind, that poetry is not simply turning loose of emotion. Poetry is something more creative because the poet uses the linguistic medium to express the self, and through this linguistic medium, the self is transformed into a linguistic expression where words or the language become very important. Challenging the power of words and exploring the significance of the word, the multiple, multifaceted, elusive nature of the word, the meaning is gradually transmuted, transformed, and poetry does this through poetic invention. The poem begins with this candid statement, I have done it again. Then see the use of the punctuation there. A period is used. The expression continues, run on line. 1 year in every 10 I manage it. Then there is a dash. So now the foregrounding is done. A start statement has been made. No explanation has been given by the poet. The meaning is left hidden or kept wrapped in between the lines in the blank space. Dominic Head, while defining modernist short story, stated that in order to understand a modern story, one must fill in the gaps in between the narrative hints. Modernist poetry also depends on this act of filling in the gaps in between the narrative hints provided by the poet. So in the first stanza, the poet states, makes a stark statement, but does not reveal anything. What she has done, she doesn't say. She simply says, I have done it again. Then she says, 1 year in every 10, I manage it. So whether she has managed to turn 1 year in every 10 year to do it, or whether she has done once in 10 year. So see the syntactical disorientation of the sentence. And then she says, yeah, I manage it. While the first sentence talks about the conclusive action, I have done it again. In the third line, the poet is talking about managing the action or the act that is inconclusive. Then in the second stanza, she moves to an image drawn from the Nazi concentration camps. She talks about her skin, the skin that was used by the Nazi to make the lampshade human skin taken from the Jews, tortured to death, exterminated in the concentration camp. It's almost skeletal body with a skin wrapped on it. And then there is a focus on the right foot. So everything is in the world of ambiguity, ambivalence, and nothing is clearly stated. Even the image that has been described has nothing to do with the personal. Through simile, the poet is trying to compare herself with the Nazi prisoners. She describes herself as a walking miracle. So this walking miracle also talks about the return of Lazarus from the land of the dead. So this Lazarus comes again. I am Lazarus, come from the land of the dead. A walking miracle, a miracle performed by Jesus Christ. So like Lazarus, this lady is again a walking miracle. But this walking miracle resembles the skin on the bone, skin on the skeleton, skin on the Nazi lampshade. Then there is a reference to the paperweight, my face, a featureless, fine Jew linen. Interestingly, the persona reveals a lot about herself. But what she reveals actually are images that have been forcefully yoked by violence together to describe her. Dr. Johnson talked about this yoking of far-fetched things together by violence as metaphysical and found in John Donne and his contemporaries. This yoking of violence, yoking by violence together of far-fetched things. Sylvia Plath is also doing the same thing. While describing the self, she is describing the images drawn from the Nazi concentration camp. And then she places herself on the theater of war, as if she is laid on the theater of war, captured by the enemies. So this is also the hospital that she is talking about, where she is placed. She's asking for feeling of the napkin. Oh, my enemy. Do I terrify? She's asking the question, do I terrify? The assumed presence of enemies can be regarded as a new kind of dramatic monologue where we have the reaction of the enemy absent. In the dramatic monologues of Robert Browning, there are references to the emotional state or response of the silent other who is present in the poems. But here the silent other's response too is presented through the monologic discourse of the poet. So when she asks, do I terrify? So it is assumed that yes, she looks horrible. Then she goes on to itemize every part of her body, the nose, the eye pits, the full set of teeth, the sour breath. So all these are itemized. And then she says that this sore breath will vanish in a day. And when flesh will be set, she will put on some weight. And once she turns from a walking miracle to a healthy person, she again will become a normal, ordinary, smiling woman. She reveals her age, I am only 30. Factual, autobiographical. And then she goes on to describe her coming to life again and again as the life of a cat, using a simile again, and like the cat, I have 9 times to die. She describes this death wish or attempt to die, as the third one. This is number 3. What a trash. So she regards this as a trash. 10 years of life and then throwing this 10-year of life experience into the dustbin as a trash in order to annihilate 10 years of life. She then focuses her attention on the audience. Once again, we find the response of the audience through the focalized view of the persona who is speaking the lines. What a million filaments the peanut crunching crowd shoves into sea. The use of peanut crunching crowd, this phrase, reveals the indifference of the society, of the onlooker who have come to see the lady, and through their collective gaze, they gradually unwrap him with their curious eyes, unwrap her hand, her foot, and she appears to be a big striptease actor performing her role in front of these peanut munching crowd. This dramatic performance is hinted at through the use of the phrase run on line that moves on to the next stanza. Gentlemen, ladies, look, look, these are my hands, my knees. I may be skin and bone. Nevertheless, I'm the same identical woman. So this is a performance of the self in front of an audience. Like a striptease artist, she is peeling and showing off the itemized parts of her body, her hand, her knees, her skin, and the bone, and then thereby revealing herself as a woman, an identical woman. She talks about her past. When she was 10, it happened. Critics have been searching for the autobiographical references to this event. So it was an accident, she says. She met an accident, lost her father. So this accident, personal crisis in life, has been represented as a death. The second time she meant to last it out, to continue to death for a prolonged time, not never to return from the dark world of death, to last it out and not come back at all. Thereby she kept herself in a rocked shell, shut as a seashell. So what the audience, what the onlookers or the members of the family had to do, they had to call and call, wake her up, and then surgically take out the pills that she had consumed, pick the worms off me like sticky pearls. So through this metaphor, the personal is transformed into the universal. Finally, she comes to this realization and philosophizes on dying, on death. So death is a noun, while dying is the verb. She focuses on this verb, dying, the act of killing oneself, homicidal act. So dying, self-dying, is like an art. This elevation of the ritual of death to the artistic level, turning that into a habit, comes very close to the definition of the absurd as done by Albert Camus, C-A-M-U-S, Albert Camus, in the book called The Myth of Sisyphus. In Myth of Sisyphus, Sisyphus, a Greek mythological character, had been punished in the hell because of the sins he has committed while he was alive. In the hell, he has been punished to roll a large rock uphill. So every morning, Sisyphus is asked to roll this rock uphill. By the evening time, he reaches the top of the hill, balances the rock, and as he has balanced the rock starts slipping and rolling down. So Sisyphus, there on the top of the hill, looks at his day's work rolling down. Sisyphus, according to Albert Camus, is an absurd man with this absurd realization that I am alive, and that is the only thing, the only reason that I can justify my being. So nothingness of my being can be justified through an act that is almost absurd. So returning back to life again and again after such suicidal attempt for the poet's persona is like Sisyphean act of the absurd. So she has been doing this again and again, and like Sisyphus, the rock rolls down. The next day, Sisyphus has to carry this rock again uphill. This time is extended to 10 years. Every 10 years, she is doing the same act and again returning back to life. And she says that dying is an art like everything else. And she says that yes, she's capable of doing this act exceptionally well. So if she has done the act of dying exceptionally well, how is it, ironically, that she is again there to show the act to perfection? But she also reveals that this act of dying is the work, the action, and the act itself is like hell. Like hell, she is also trapped in a metaphysical hell from where the exit is not possible. She does it again and again. And this act of dying makes her feel real, as if she has got a call for acting thus. Then she talks about different ways of escape, different ways of dying. She says that it is enough to do it in a cell, suffocate herself. Ironically, she also died at an early age, suffocating herself. Then she says it is enough to do and stay put. It is the theatrical. Of all the theatrical acts ever done by human beings, the act of dying, the act of killing self is the most theatrical, according to the speaker. And it is more theatrical because after death, after the sojourn to the world of death, usually a person does not return back. But it is more theatrical because there is an anticlimactic turn of events. After the catastrophic death, there is a climactic U-turn, and the person resurrects and comes back in broad day. Where she comes? Interestingly, to the same place, the same face, the same route. Life is a habit, Albert Camus once said in The Myth of Sisyphus. Life is a habit, and the most deadening of all. At any street corner, one may be struck with the absurd when that person realizes that what have I been doing is just simply the habit of doing. So death itself is an act. The act itself is the act of doing it. And this act is the most terrible acts of human life, the act of self-annihilation. And what happens to her, even after conducting this act of killing herself, through a habit of killing herself, annihilating the self, she returns back to this world of habit, to the same place, same face, same route. And there is a shout. Whoever looks at her, the voice of the audience, a miracle. So she is turned from a human being into a miracle, a relic. And that relic identity, that miracle identity, turns her from Sylvia Plath into Lady Lazarus. And she is disturbed, highly disturbed by this analysis of herself, of her by the society as a miracle. And she's knocked out by this charge, and she asks for a charge, for a fees, for eyeing of her scars, the pains. She demands some fees, some charge, just for listening to the agonies of her heart. And she goes on to say that, yes, you have to pay, and there is a very, very, very large charge just for a word or a touch or a bit of blood. So, bit of blood refers to Jesus Christ's resurrection. Before resurrection, there is a crucifixion of Christ, and the cup containing the blood of Christ, the golden blood of Christ, sacred to the Christians. So she is also asking for a similar charge because she is crucified by the society. Death, her death, her societal death is caused by society. And she's asking for a charge for this. If you want a word from me, if you want to touch and feel that, yes, I'm alive, a miracle is walking on the foot. If you want to realize or get a bit of blood from me, you have to pay a large charge. And if you want to keep my hair or my clothes as relic, as a sacred items collection, so you have to pay a charge for that. The entire poem then moves from a confessional poem to an advertorial poem. A confessional advertorial poem where the poet is advertising her own self, her own pain, agony, suffering against a charge. So she is appealing to doctor. Doctor is called enemy. She says, I am your opus, I am your valuable, the pure gold baby. So this is the object that you have with you, and very valuable pure gold object that you are showing off to the world, rescuing me back to life. I turn, I burn. I understand, yes. I never underestimate your great concern. Finally, she says, what is left of her is nothing but ash. Ash. So if you just poke and stir the ash, what you find there? Nothing, nothing there except my flesh, my bone. Nothing is there. So anorexic body that is there. And what you find else? You will find a cake of soap. My entire body's flesh and fat melt to produce a soap, as was done in the Nazi concentration camp. What you find? You find a wedding ring, the relic of my marriage, marriage to Ted Hughes. If you regard this poem as a confessional one, that wedding ring you will get a relic of my past marital happiness, my love, or you will get a gold filling of my dead body. So out of my dead body, nothing remains. Finally, she appeals to the god, the satanic god Lucifer, together, and she warns, beware, beware. So the voice in her speaks. So she is in ash-like state. Everything has been extracted from her, even after exterminating her, turning her into ash. Everything has been taken away. Yet she warns the society that has forced her to commit suicide. Beware, beware. She says that out of this ash, one day I will rise. I will rise with my red hair, flaming red hair. And then, like Medusa, I will eat men like hair. So, well, while reading the poem, we found that the poem takes information, most of the information from the personal life, and then goes on to declare or celebrate the universal through myths and symbols. So this is all I have to say. If you have any questions, you can ask. So only two good
No,
souls
sir, it's
left.
clear.
Okay. So thank you
No,
very
sir,
much.
it's clear.
So any questions you have? So we conclude this poem. Thank you very much for your audience. So next day on Thursday
Thank
2:30
you,
we will
sir.
take class. Okay, Thursday 2:30 again.
Thank.
Modernism and
Okay,
T.S.
sir.
Eliot.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, modernism and T.S. Eliot. We will
Okay, sir.
deal with preludes. Thank you very
Okay,
much.
sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay,
Thank
bye.
you, sir.
Bye.
Thank you, sir. Bye, sir.